I think we're about ready to begin, if there's no objections. I'm going to begin by reading the protocol, but really wanted to welcome those that are here and also those that may be watching us. Good evening and welcome everyone. Before we begin the proceedings of our committee meeting, I need to highlight the safety protocols and expectations. Due to the CDC guidance placing Kent County in the substantial risk category of transmission of COVID-19 Delta variant, we are requiring masks indoors for everyone on the grounds of the Grand Rapids Public School property for all students, staff, visitors, regardless of vaccination status. If you need a mask, these are available at the entries. Public comment cards and meeting agendas are located on the tables within the board chambers at both entrances. Once you fill out a comment card, please submit this in a drop box next to the comment cards. Our board assistant will collect the cards. When I call for public comment, I will call on each individual one at a time to address the committee at the presentation table. On behalf of the Finance Committee and administration, thank you for being here in attendance with us. And I believe we have a quorum, so I don't know that there are any public comments. There are not, so Larry, if we can begin.
We can begin. Good evening, Reverend Matias and committee members. First up on your agenda are the action items, first being the purchasing agenda, and I've thrown it up here on the screen. Just a few comments here. The first one is to modify our blanket. You may recall with Ms. Pitt's retirement, we engaged Troon to help with the GREA negotiations, and weren't really quite sure when the blanket was done way back in June, July, how much time that would take. So this would, to increase the blanket to, we think will cover the remainder of the effort we need from Troon on the GRE bargaining. A couple items in the instructional area, the tripod renewal, Clark Communications, those are both ESSER-funded expenditures and part of our ESSER investment plan, initial investment plan. As are some of that support material you see below there, the ELA, instructional support, Tier 2, I believe, aid for our students, district-wide, again, ESSER funding, and some additional other support services. Item 2 there, DBQ company. Both of those purchases, licenses, include both an English language and a Spanish language modules. And then our usual Spectrum Health, as you know, provides community health workers for our school health group, and that's just the dollar amount. We reimbursed Spectrum for those people costs, so those are funded, have been funded historically out of 31A dollars. And then a couple of items, again, related to ESSER funding. This is our ESSER spending on some additional roofs that we need for 9 of our buildings. And in your packet, there are some supporting memos that Facilities Group, Long as provided, and then also some design work on the 7 buildings that have little or no ventilation system. Both of those, because of the nature, went out for bids, and these are the winning vendors, and certainly any questions on that, on those 2 in particular, Long can answer up here, but that's the nature of the purchasing agenda for this evening.
Is there any questions or?
I have a wondering in that, again, we talk about bids all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be very supportive of communications and whatnot, but we have my wondering is, are we bidding out the public relations services and marketing?
Yeah, the item you see here to Clark Communications, that was a bid process. We got 3 responses on that. And Clark, which is a Grand Rapids-based company, in the city prevailed in that whole process, yeah.
Okay, that leads to my next wondering. And
Sure.
my next wondering is, when I looked them up, I noticed that they have an address in Grand Rapids, but the two principals have their homes in Rockford. My wondering is, in situations like that, and we have companies that have a Grand Rapids office, does that make them then Grand Rapids first?
Yeah, the rules are that
Okay.
their place of business is based within the city limits, not their personal residence, so, yeah.
Alrighty, good clarification
Thank
for
you.
me. Thank you.
I'll motion for approval of the purchasing agenda.
All in favor, say yes.
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 Yeah.
Thank you.
Motion carries.
The next two items, and we can act on them separately, the first being our annual banking and investment resolution. Once approved here, I'll go to the full board for their action at the next board meeting in early December, but we have not, there's been no change in either our financial institutions or our investment institutions. PNC, you may recall, gosh, I think it was about 5 years ago, and I went through a bid process and named them as our new lead bank. They've been doing a great job for us. We still have relationships with Fifth Third and Huntington National Bank locally also. On the second page of that, under item 4, you'll see some of the financial institutions where we have some of our investments. The big one being the Michigan Cooperative Liquid Asset Security System, which holds some of our day-to-day investments, and then PFM Asset Management manages the bond funds, which is a pool of municipal organizations. When we first issued the 2016 bond, and those proceeds is when we invested that in the PFM Asset Management. So that needs Finance Committee's action to move to the board for their full approval on this resolution.
Any questions?
I will motion for approval of the banking and investment resolution.
Second.
Great, all in favor, say yes.
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 Thank you. And then the second resolution, again, an annual resolution that needs to happen is we've had a summer school tax collection for the district for, I don't know how long, but certainly since I've been here. And we're required every year, or you're required every year, to essentially approve a summer collection. And then once approved, we have to notify the taxing entities, primarily the city of Grand Rapids, of that decision, and that notification has to take place prior to the end of the calendar year. So your approval here would move it to the board for their full approval on the December 6th board meeting.
Great, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Support.
All in favor, say yes.
Yes.
Great, thank you. And then finally, a couple of donations that have come in for your consideration and acceptance and approval. First being from Fox 7 Scripps Foundation, approximately $9,200 for East Leonard Elementary. You can see an opportunity for all the children at that elementary school to select up to 10 scholastic books, 2 distributions of 5 books each, first being mid-January, and the other will be a little bit later. One of the requirements of accepting this is that there would be an interview with Fox 17. I'm not sure. That hasn't been scheduled yet, pending approval by the board. I'm not sure who they want to interview, but certainly John and Hillmont Communications will coordinate that when that time comes.
Great, I'll entertain a motion for that.
Motion to approve.
Support.
All Right, all in favor say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. And then the second and last donation for this evening is from Ada Congregational Church. Consists of school supplies, backpacks, books, both used and new books. Now, Mr. Johnson and Jonathan, our curriculum director, Jonathan Harper, were arranging to get the titles of the books and to inspect the used books, just to ensure that they are in fact gently used. But that doesn't prohibit us from, or you from accepting this at this point. And then, secondly, they also came through in the process of finishing up collecting winter coats, boots, hats, and mittens. The intent would be to get those distributed prior to the children leaving for the winter break. The value of the first one is about $14,000, as you can see there, and then the clothing value is about $12,000.
And I know that one of the things that we talked about was making sure that our needy students or those
Yeah,
that are
yeah.
at risk would be able to do that, and you guys are doing that, correct?
Yeah. Once we get the donations in-house, we've had this discussion already, we'll determine both the supplies and backpacks and everything else, as well as the clothing. We'll assess where the greatest need is and distribute them appropriately based on that.
Yeah, I've seen some of those distributions, and it's pretty exciting to see.
Yeah.
You know, for a lot of the families that are in need of good winter clothing. So that's great. I would entertain
I move to accept these donations from Ada Congregational Church and Sherry Lynn Noah and Friends.
Support?
great. All in favor say yes.
Yes.
Thank you. That completes the action items for this evening. We're down to item 2 on the agenda, which is reports, updates, financial dashboard through October. Again, is included in your materials, and let me just pull it up here. I mean, we're tracking it, appropriately for where we're at 4 months into our fiscal year. As I've mentioned before, 2022 annual budget column, the far right there is the original budget that was approved back in June. As I've mentioned before, and as you're all aware, things have changed significantly in terms of their revenue side, with a significant increase in foundation allowance. And the business office is and will be working on Amendment 1, which, again, we hope to bring to this group at the January meeting, and then subsequent to the board at the first February meeting for their approval. As well as, and that, not only what you see here is the general fund, the operating fund itself, but also there'll be some significant changes with respect to our grant dollars, in particular ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, which we continue to, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, just briefly, but continue to finalize and determine how much of those dollar amounts we will spend in the current fiscal year. But that'll all be coming to you, as I said, at this point in January. But other than that, and the fund balance projected number there, the almost 8 million, 6.2%. Again, it's based on the original budget. That will look a little higher, as you're aware of in our conversation a month ago or so about the year-end audit. So, any questions, particularly on the financial operations so far? I think you're all aware we're still struggling in areas in terms of people, and continue to try to think of different ways to get folks, in fact, we had a conversation, executives cabinet again, of other ways to incent people to apply, but it's a challenge all over the place. So, And then Long will give us a bond update, if you would.
Good evening, Reverend Matias and committee members. Southwest, we're going to have a water test on Wednesday to figure out what the leak is in the science room. And then all other HVAC issues has been solved as of now. Union, the project has a final inspection with the fire marshal on Wednesday. Everything goes well. We're close to getting done with that. The contractors are working on the punch list items right now. And then winter break, we're just going to do a terrazzo polishing, get the furniture, and then we're going to be all set and out of Union in January. Ottawa Hills, the Union roof is nearly complete. They're going to come back during the spring to pick up some minor items. And then Ottawa roof has been underway, and hopefully we'll get as much done before the snow hits to stop a lot of the leaks that we have had. Secured entries, we're in the final stages of completing that project. Card readers are being worked on, and there are some smoke detectors to be installed at one of the buildings. Innovation Central, the architects are working on completing the DD phase, which should be mid-December. And there's been some selected demolition, like removing some windows, and even this Wednesday we're going to pop a hole in some of the walls to see what's behind that. Bid package 1 has been issued to acquire some of the building envelope material to get construction started this summer. Any questions or concerns?
Great, thank you.
Okay, a brief update on the ESSER update. We did file an amended ESSER 1 application that was primarily related to, you may recall, the ESSER 1 dollars which we got last year required us to share that with the non-publics. And even though we had essentially spent all of our ESSER 1 dollars, some of the non-publics that we're responsible for that are on the application had not yet spent that. So we did file an amended ESSER formula, we call it, or ESSER 1, to reflect where the non-publics were and additional spending on that. We also filed our first amendment to ESSER 2. The first ESSER 2 application was done, I want to say, back in June. At that point, only a portion, that was, you may recall, I don't remember the amount now, 46% of it was allocated at that point in time. And so we filed the application for that amount. It actually was approved. And we filed an amendment to ESSER 2, which all the ESSER 2 dollars, almost $33 million, has been allocated, so that included all of the $33 million. We did get it back Friday? Yes, today? Friday, with some questions that Rhonda and I are going to get together on, I think Monday morning now, and work through those. Kind of as we were expecting somewhat, they want a lot more detail now than they did back when we filed the first one. And so, and there's limited space in the application. It's an online application, how much data. So we need to be very succinct, but give them enough information that they can approve it, hopefully. ESSER 3 application, which I've mentioned before, is a different and much more involved application. It's a separate one. ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 are the same application. In fact, they're filed in the same application, right, Donna? Right, Rhonda? 1 and 2 are the same. Yeah, same application. ESSER 3, separate, much more involved, narratives, checklists, everything else. As we got into the actual application, we have all the data, as you're aware. We've been accumulating. You've had presentations at board meeting in terms of the initial investment plan. It's becoming a much more involved process as we got into it than we had, than we could predict. We had hoped to have that filed before the Thanksgiving break. I'll tell you, it's not going to happen. We're still working on it now, and we will complete or continue to move forward on that ESSER 3. It has a first due date of December 15th. I'd like to hope that we can have the full application, at least the first time, done by then. Michigan Department of Education, as I've mentioned before, is the administrator of all these federal programs we've had since the pandemic started. When they did the Sr3 application, they realized it may be difficult for especially complex, big districts like us. And so they did give an opportunity on the application, Sr3, that if you don't have everything done, you can check a box that says, we're working on it, it's not quite done yet, and that satisfies the December 15th initial due date, and they will have an extended due date, which they haven't come out yet formally and said what it was, although they mentioned in one of the webinars I sat in that it perhaps would be March 15th, so a 3-month application. But we're working on that, but it's a lot of effort, just a lot of effort. And again, understand that the Sr3, we have until 2024, but the application, you have to include everything in there at that point, and with a fair amount of detail, so as MDE says, so we can assess whether or not it's an allowable expenditure. So it's challenging, and it's taken some time, and but we're moving forward on that, and I will continue to give this group updates as we progress with the Sr3. And again, I think I mentioned last meeting that when that was finalized, that number went from $70 million that we had been working with to almost $74 million. So there's some additional money that we have not yet allocated, pending trying to get this a lot of this Sr3 done first, and we'll go back and allocate the other $4 million, or leave it in the kind of an unallocated amount, if you will. So, any questions on that at this point? I know tomorrow we have our monthly Kent business officials meeting at the ISD, and on the agenda is some discussion about the Sr3 application. So both Ron and I are curious to hear what some of our other colleagues, some of their experience has been, because there's just been a lot of questions. There continues to be new information from MDE. And in fact, I think isn't Kevin Walters supposed to be there tomorrow? Yeah, Kevin Walters, who's a point person at MDE, is actually going to be at there. I don't know if he'll be dialed into the KSBO meeting. So we'll get some better sense on that. And I suspect it's going to be an iteration of the Sr3 application until we get to a point where they're satisfied and we're satisfied. So that's where it stands now. Any questions on that?
You know, on an encouraging note, I had a conversation with Dr. Roby, and I think if I have it right, she kind of indicated that the ISD was looking at GRPS as an example with how your handling of the ESSER funds and just how you have brought it along. And they actually are inquiring, like, how are you guys doing that? Because we really think that's a good idea. And so kudos to your team in regards to that. It just seems that they're really showing some thoughtfulness. You know, we're showing thoughtfulness on how we're spending the money, the public conversations that we've had, the transparency, and that's been a good conversation for others too, as they are looking at, you know, these large sums of money. So thank you.
Which reminds me, one thing I did forget to update you on, really, to ESSER. I think I may have mentioned our last meeting that for Sr3, you may recall there is a significant number of stakeholders that the whole process had to be exposed to, and we checked most of the boxes going back to when we started this, months ago, and of course had the public hearing. But there are a couple areas that we determined we probably needed some additional input, one being students. I think I mentioned I met with the student leadership group back in October, and there was a follow-up meeting. I guess actually Mel Atkins was at their meeting last week as a follow-up, because one of the areas they focused on was, mental health services and counseling services. So we'll try to get those into the application where appropriate. The other group, where we had a choice of number of community organizations, civil rights organization, disability supporters, and one being tribes. And we had a previous conversation with tribal leadership of the 12 tribes that represented the area, and they wanted both a follow-up conversation on the strategic plan itself, as well as use that for additional ESSER input. So that took place, I want to say, a couple of weeks ago with a group of, again, their leadership, including the tribal president and several of their educational directors from the various tribes. Some were in person with us, some were zoomed in, and got some additional input on both the strategic plan and the ESSER, and we're finalizing some of that information now, and we'll reflect where we can in both the strategic plan and the Sr3 application, so that we've covered the stakeholders group and they ask, this is all part of the application, they ask us, if we've satisfied all those requirements, and so we are being very deliberate in retaining all the appointments and agendas from all these meetings, because sometime down the road when we get audited, we will get audited, I'm guessing, they're going to ask us to prove that we had these meetings, because all they ask in the application is, did you do it or not? But when they actually come and do the audit of the programs at some point in the future, they will ask for support for those assertions we made. So anyways, so that we believe that we've covered that. Now again, once we file the application, it's approved. I think I've mentioned this earlier. We are required to update that application every 6 months and allow for additional public input, which we will do once the application is approved. So.
I'd like to reiterate my advocacy for consideration of programs and services and leadership, in particular leadership, for Native Americans from the indigenous community. And while I'm certainly not part of the council, I consider myself indigenous and
Sure.
and an advocate for that particular group. At one point, I was the LEA for this district, organizing and providing some leadership to that group. And I think that it would go beyond being symbolic. I think it would begin to build our capacity to serve not only all students about the cultures of the Native tribes in West Michigan and in the Grand Rapids area, but also this nation, and to help us put history correct, teach history correct, teach the culture correct, and make our citizens more appreciative of diversity.
Yeah, I will mention, after that meeting I was talking about with the tribal group, we actually then met with a gentleman from MDE, Nate, I don't remember his last name now, but he is the Native Americans consultant. And he came down here and met with Maida and myself, and Rhonda was there, I think Mel. Very enlightening, and a lot of good ideas, and answered many questions that we had, and you'll be seeing more from under Maida's leadership in terms of expanding that relationship with our Native American presence here in West Michigan, and developing that relationship. And it's all built on trust, as you know, and so but we'll be moving forward, and you'll be hearing more of that as time goes on, certainly. But thanks for your comments, Dr. Flores, appreciate it.
Great, thank you. And I see that we have no policy items.
Nothing as it relates to the financials yet. So
Okay.
although I will mention, again, just the tax collections in the state through October are still very positive, and both the general fund and the school aid fund, they're exceeding the estimates that were made back in May at the revenue estimating conference. So it's still very, very positive in terms of the state's situation. They still have, I don't know how many billions of dollars of their ARP money that's yet to be allocated and spent. So I'd like to think the 22-23 school year will be a positive one for us and for all of us in Michigan, all districts in Michigan financially, as things still are pretty strong. So
Great, and with that, we are adjourned.
thank you.
Thank you.